Hello everyone and welcome to So Very Wrong About Games. This is a special bonus episode of So Very Wrong About Games, partially to compensate you for the fact that we did not release an episode last week due to emergency kitten-related medical travel, and also because a listener suggested that we ought to show people what some of our Patreon-exclusive content looks like. Now, the initial impulse, of course, is just to be lazy and dig up the vaults of some of the hundreds and hundreds of Patreon-exclusive episodes and just release it in its entirety. But then, of course, we would be lying because then it's not Patreon-exclusive anymore. So we've decided to split the difference and give you sort of a sampler platter of some of the shows that we release somewhat regularly under the banner of Patreon content here at So Very Wrong About Games. So, this is not going to take the form of a normal episode. We're just going to give you bits of somewhat recent bonus episodes that we published through Patreon. First, we're going to show you a bit from Pledge of Indifference. Pledge of Indifference is the bi-weekly show where Walker and I look through campaigns on crowdfunding. That is to say, almost exclusively Kickstarter, GameFound, and BackerKit, but on occasion we find other things as well. And we comment on those ongoing pledges. We talk about what we're pledging for, what we're not pledging for. The latter is a much, much larger category, in part hence the term Pledge of Indifference. And we talk about recent acquisitions and recent pledges that have come in. After that, I'm going to show you a bit of an episode of BLOAT. BLOAT is an acronym for Mark Blathers On About Things, and that is the venue for me to share whatever is passing through my addled mind at a given moment, independent of the main show. This is always at least tangentially related to board games and board game media, although sometimes, as you will hear in this particular case, I draw on other things. In the clip you're going to hear, I'm going to talk about a lot about video games in the American Supreme Court. But anyway, trust me, there's a jurisdictional hook back to board games in case you were curious. Finally, there's the newest Patreon-exclusive show here at So Very Wrong About Games, SIZZLER, which is Spirit Island zealously zapping legions of European rapscallions, and that is where we talk about Spirit Island. Walker, for perhaps obvious reasons, is not involved. Instead, I talk with my friends Jimbo and Megan about our somewhat regular games of Spirit Island. And we talk about what spirits we played, our experiences with them, the adversary we played against, general thoughts on the game. And this, too, is a roughly bi-weekly show. So Pledge of Indifference is every other week like clockwork. SIZZLER is roughly every other week, and BLOAT is intermittent. Sometimes I've done 2 bloats in a week. Sometimes I've only done 1 bloat in a month. Long story short, through the various offerings we have at So Very Wrong About Games, and some other shows as well, such as So Very Wrong About All the Games You Like Are Bad, you're gonna hear about 1-ish bonus episodes a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, through the Patreon feed. And as I say, this is just a sampling of what we do on that channel. So if you're at all interested in supporting us, of course, please do check out patreon.com/swag, and we would be more than happy to have your support. If not, that's fine too. Enjoy this episode, and we apologize for having missed last week, and that's fine. We can go forth and sin no more. So first up, here is Pledge of Indifference.
We pledge indifference to the campaign for the latest stuff on Kickstarter, and to the FOMO for which it stands. Next up, Shipwrights of the North Sea Redo.
Yes. You say redo?
Redux.
Oh, no, it's a legitimate interpretation. Sorry, I was just asking out of
curiosity. No, it is Redux.
It's what happens when you... No, redo is a legit... It has been sufficiently... It's kind of like verse for versus. At a certain point, it becomes an acceptable pronunciation. I mean, acceptable. It's always acceptable pronunciation, but whatever. I spend too much time on the wrong linguists. Moving on. So this is Shem Phillips in the X-Profession of the Why Place Name series. Apparently this is the game that started it all, and they're redoing it.
So, Mark.
Yes?
I'm not saying that this is the way they're doing it.
Okay.
Or not the way that other people might interpret it.
But there's a possibility.
There's a possibility it might be, here is a very popular game. Let's tweak it a bit and make them pay for it again. And then at the same time, make all of our other available all of our other games available on the Not Store Kickstarter page store.
I don't know. I don't know enough about the original game to comment. I just say that when I see Garphill Games and I see Shem Phillips, I just move on. They're all perfectly serviceable.
Yeah, but a lot of people like them.
A lot of people like them. To me, they're just perfectly serviceable, incredibly bland Euros. Nothing particularly of note. It's an impressive brand that they built, quite frankly. They've done a very, very good job of building up a brand. To be frank, I'm surprised that with 6 days to go, it has only raised this much money. Given the number of people that do appreciate it, it's raised less than 300,000 Canadian dollars so far.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm surprised, especially given, as you say, that it's basically a store. Oh, maybe it's all these people that are pledging $1 and are going to get everything in the store later.
Maybe.
I don't know. Yeah, I've yet to play. People keep saying, try X of the Y, try Z of the W, try A of the G. Like, they all just feel so generic and recycled Euro stuff. None of them have ever really captured my attention.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this has helped them or hurt them in the long run.
Oh, you mean redoing?
Not this particular project. Just the fact that they're all so similar sounding and looking. Right.
Oh, okay.
Do people just dismiss the whole line, or if they had if they made a completely different cut to something totally different?
That's a good point.
Would it get more eyes on? Because I don't know.
I mean, my natural assumption is to say that they've built themselves a successful brand, and that's got to be good for return customers. But you may be right. There may be far too many people who. I mean, hell, there might be some people like, don't I already have that one? Or because they can't tell them apart.
With sleeves or without sleeves?
Box sleeves. You got to get the special box sleeves, man.
Well, because the difference would be that your Raiders game wouldn't look the same as the rest. You see, because for some reason, the side of the Raiders
some of them are
box.
saying, no, Explorers are the same, Shipwrights are the same. The other ones, the sleeve brings it down. Oh, you're right. Oh, this is weird. I don't get it.
No.
Well, clearly they're interested in building a brand because they like showing all their boxes of the same size lined up against each other.
Yeah. I've got them all.
Gotta catch them all, Walker.
Let's move on.
That is Shipwrights of the North Sea Redux.
Next up, we found it, Mark.
Yep.
Yeah, you want...
I've been looking for this game all my life.
Yep, you want the campaign system that is, all the ones that are on our shelf that are gathering dust that we should play, but no. Just throw those in the garbage.
It's going to be Tanares Adventures Ultimate Edition.
All the time.
Yes.
All the way down.
Vera Pinlow. I get strong Vera Pinlow vibes from this one.
So this is a reprint of a game that they've already put out once.
Yes, there's going to be... It's the standard expansion plus reprint campaign.
I wanted this because it has all of these words. Look, revolutionary. Dynamic.
Revolutionary and dynamic.
Rewarding. Strategic. All of these streamlined. Man,
wow.
So many, dramatic.
So many buzzwords. Is it innovative too?
Yeah.
I assume if it's revolutionary, it's also innovative.
Probably somewhere. We'll find it.
So the essential gameplay pledge is 189 American dollars.
But no, that is the you don't believe in the system pledge. You need to go... You need to go all the way down. Yeah, all the way down.
Oh, well, no, the super box is only 489. The all-in... so there's a super and all-in? The all-in is 649 American, and then there's cosmetic, including the penumbral terrace.
Exactly.
For 839.
Exactly.
A mere 1,116 Canadian dollars. Holy crap.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because if you have faith in the system, Mark.
Yeah, if you're a believer, yeah.
Exactly. Then how can you not spend $1,000?
Do you know what a sucker would do in the face of Tanares Adventures? In the face of Tanares Adventures, it would be the act of a great fool, a tremendous sucker, to buy Gloomhaven for 130.
Exactly.
Only a moron. What kind of moron would do that? I mean, hell, once you get all the miniatures for Gloomhaven, it's all the way up to $260. Why would you want a fully miniatured out Gloomhaven when you could pay $1,000 for this?
I am baffled.
This is even far, far more than Oathsworn, like the ridiculous Oathsworn that's 4 huge boxes.
Look at these boxes.
Boxes for days, man. Yo, dog, I heard you like boxes. Yeah. Honestly, to be entirely fair, here's the thing that always gives me pause. Every time there's a campaign like this, and we say the same things we always say. This is Vera Pinlow. This is another thing. Whatever. There's always that 1 in a trillion chance that it's the next Gloomhaven. There's even just a 1 in a million chance that it's the next Oathsworn, because Oathsworn is amazing. But it looked more or less like this.
It did
in its crowdfunding campaign,
and it will go up on the shelf and gather dust like all the other campaign systems.
I swear we're gonna get back to Oathsworn. I want to find out what happens next. I want to find out.
I agree.
and it's good, and it is worth getting back to, and we need to play. So, look, Frosthaven and Oathsworn, those are the two. Those are the two that we need to get back to at some point, even just a couple of games. I don't even necessarily mean we need to do a death march to the end. I just want to...
Yeah.
But the thing is, I will say, though, that when Oathsworn came out, a whole bunch of people that I trust said, this has no right to be this good, right?
Yeah.
I have heard nothing from the people I trust about Tanares Adventures.
I've heard nothing about it at all.
Yeah, see, there you go.
Until this side, I said, "Oh, that miniature looks kind of cool."
Oh, yeah, the dragon next to the pagoda looks neat, no doubt.
So that's what drew me into looking at it, and then I was just like,
yeah, see, that's the thing. That's one of the reasons why. So having said that, there's always the 1 in a million chance, the 1 in a trillion chance. That is why it is important to have people with a good critical eye that you trust, right?
6,487 backers.
Yes.
For $1 million.
$1.5 million Canadian, yeah. Yeah.
People must like it.
Yeah. People keep buying them. I mean, that's why they keep on. Look, the market's going to do what the market's going to do.
Yeah.
And you got to figure a whole bunch of these people have the base game and they haven't played it, right? Yeah. How many of those backers? What proportion of that backer amount is people who have the base game and who haven't played it and are still buying the expansion? I don't know, but it's an interesting question, I think.
Agreed.
And that is Tanares Adventures Ultimate Edition. They say Ultimate, but I bet you there's going to be more.
It's true.
Yeah.
Next up, Cyclades. I don't know. I wanted to play the video to show you how they pronounced it in the video.
So I've heard Cyclades and Cyclades. Those are the two pronunciations I've heard. But again, pronunciations are what pronunciations are going to be. So this is the semi-classic, I guess, game from Asmodee, originally, by Ludovic Maublin and Bruno Catala. And it's a game I've always wanted to like more than I do.
Well, this has one good thing going for it.
What's that?
Madagot's not putting it out.
Yeah, no kidding.
Talk about taking a top-tier company.
Yes.
And then plummeting it into the ground. Welcome to Yucatan.
Solid pronunciation there, Walker, on the topic of pronunciation here.
Yep.
Let me fist up.
Thank you. All right. So I want to be excited for this. I had the original in my thing. I enjoyed playing it, but I cannot get excited for this. I don't know why.
Cyclades is one of those things, or Cyclades, I don't know which is the quote-unquote standard Canadian pronunciation. I don't really care. It was one of those games very much like a lot of Martin Wallace games that I should have liked more. It's like, bidding plus troops on a map, all over that, right? And with a mythological theme. But I think it was the nature of the economy. It always struck me as too tight. Like, in order to bid successfully for something, you then never had enough money to do anything fun. So I didn't think that it cohered well in terms of my own experience.
True, but I think you're just supposed to take the hit and then go to a place where,
I know. I'm not saying I played it well. I'm just saying personally, I never really felt like it was really shining for me. As opposed to a game like Antica, which similarly has like a Euro action selection mechanism and a troops on a map thing.
I'm going to have to read the rules because I want to see if they change anything about the end game, and then I might.
Yeah, because you object. I don't object to the end game, but you do.
Yeah.
Did you find it anticlimactic or too sudden?
Both.
Okay, fair enough. And I do appreciate this again. There's this market thing that keeps happening. People want the basic edition, right? Without minis, they want to have the option of doing it. So they have a Meeple pledge, which is 85 Canadian dollars, and 346 people have backed for it. All right. And then there's the miniatures pledge, which is 145 Canadian dollars, and 313 have backed for this. This is the first time I have ever seen the basic pledge outstrip the miniatures pledge. Now, that having been said, then there's the... Oh, sorry. I would like to retract everything I said. Because the ultimate pledge, which is 175 Canadian dollars, which includes the miniatures edition, is 3,274 backers. I'm sorry. I was speaking nonsense out of my
see, that's the problem I have too. Is the miniatures are so nice.
And
when you see the tables and then you compare the monster pogs to the actual... I've got to follow my own path though. If I do get it, it has to be the meat. But when I can't preach getting less plastic and then get the plastic, right?
Yeah, especially if there were an add-on pledge for just the monster minis, that might make sense, right?
Yeah.
But as it is, you have to get all of the minis. The only things that you can get separately are the buildings with the metropolises.
Metropoli.
Really?
No, it's not real, but it sounds better than... I know.
Metropolises?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, fine. And then, of course, you get the metal coins.
Of course, for $30.
I know.
Bucks, but it's a lot, I think.
No, if I were to back for this, and I'm not going to, because I wanted to like Cyclades so much. On paper, it should be the game, one of my favorites, but it just never really worked for a variety of reasons. Always solid. Like, I was never like, ugh, this is bad.
Yes,
it just didn't quite hit.
Yeah, but I think I'm going to have to. It's just sat on the shelf.
Yeah.
So, why give it another try?
Yeah, but if I were to pledge for this, I think the value proposition is obvious, and I would go for the Meeple edition. Because the difference in price from $85 to $145, that's $60 for the miniatures, that's a fair amount.
You know what else? It is a 6-player game, though.
Yeah.
It's hard to find 6 players.
That is true. I mean...
It's not hard to find 6 players. It's hard to find quality 6-player games.
That move. Yeah. And Cyclades always did move. Yeah, look at the rules. They have changed the endgame, at least in terms of
I've heard there's something
the number of metropolises you need. I don't know if they've changed anything past that.
And the way the map's built now,
honestly, that I could care less about.
Well, it's the fact of getting it to the table, right? The figuring out, how many players and how to set up this.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It looks though that all has been streamlined. So,
well, I don't know. Like variable maps, I used to think that variable maps were a great thing, but now I'm less sure. Because Cyclades was just a weird assortment of islands anyway. I don't really see what the virtue of making those tiles are. It's kind of like Small World, right? It's like, ooh, there's a variable map now for Small World. I don't really care. The only exception would be for things like Scythe. I still want to try the variable map for Scythe because it really was so correlated with the factions. Like, okay, you faction, you start with these 2 resources. And mixing that up, I think, would change things considerably.
It's odd, because we have it.
We haven't played Scythe in a Dog's Age.
I know.
I was actually going to consider suggesting it today, but...
True.
But here we are.
What are those?
I can't remember if Dr. Stallone likes Scythe.
I gotta look at those. I can't figure out those tokens. But anyway, I'll look at myself.
We can play Scythe with 6. There you go. That's the 6-player game. Of course, Dewey doesn't like Scythe, so there's that. I don't. Yeah, it's just right on the cusp for me. Honestly, I'm not going to back this, but those are the bidding markers, right?
Oh yeah, all right.
Oh no, the bidding marker is the tower. Those might be control markers or something.
So this is So this doesn't have like monument. It has heroes, which were not.
Heroes were introduced in some of the expansion stuff, yeah.
The Titan stuff's not there.
No Titan stuff.
The weird...
Titan mode is gone.
There was also other, remember, little sort of statues you'd put in the different places, the white statues that did things as well.
Honestly, by the end, there was so much optional and add-on stuff for Cyclades. And I tried all of them, and none of them quite worked for me. Like I said, always on the cusp.
All right, let's move on. That is Cyclades. More on to follow, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That's it? Next up we have stuff.
No, we were going to talk again about
Gloomhaven
Grand Festival.
I have it in the wrong order here. You are correct.
So what's new in Gloomhaven Grand Festival is Buttons and Bugs, which is not to be confused with the Dinosaur song Buttons and Bows, but I'm sure it's very similar. So a lot of people rolled their eyes at this because, it's another product on the already somewhat product-packed Gloomhaven Festival. Masai-Nasama Makusa. But this is Gloomholden. This is the published version of Gloomholden, and I, for one, am always thrilled whenever a popular print-and-play game makes good and becomes successful. Like, Underfalling Skies was great. A publisher just goes to the developers of Underfalling Skies and says, we want to publish this and make it better. Great. This is an instance of Cephalofair Games and Nikki Valens, one of the most interesting designers currently working today, working on Gloomholden. I think it's great.
Yeah, you want less table space? Well, this will do it for you.
Yeah, less table space, less setup.
Gloomholden was supposed to be held in your hand. I think this is a little more elaborate than that, but but still very stripped down in comparison.
Honestly, I'm going to get this retail. No joke. I'm not interested in backing the Gloomhaven Grand Festival.
Are you not getting anything there?
No.
I can just tack it on then.
Oh, okay. Oh, I forgot you were backing this.
Yeah, I wanted to upgrade my unused box of Gloomhaven.
Oh, I remember. Yes. I forgot you were getting the upgrade pack. Yeah. Tack on the Buttons and Bugs for me. Look.
Will do.
I love Nikki Valens. I love print and play projects to make good. This is one. It warms the cockles of my heart, Walker.
Very nice. I think this is a family show. Settle down.
That's not that you don't. No, that's not how. You've ruined that word for me now, Walker. It's just gone.
It's gone?
It's gone.
Are we backing anything right now? Well, we just talked about on Backer Lit. I am...
Now you're just doing it on purpose.
Backer Kit. I am backing Gloomhaven, the upgrade part anyway. And now Buttons and
Bugs.
Buttons and Bugs. On a bunch of stuff finished, which unfortunately I've quote note, here we are.
Biohack just finished.
Stroganov expansion.
The Turtlecon, yeah. Rising Robots was a while ago.
But nothing showed up recently, at least for me.
I am currently backing, as I said, the Supermoon expansion, and I am very close to backing Projekt Riese. Just because, as I say, it's sufficiently charming, and we like co-op murder-a-thons.
It's true.
We never get tired of them.
No.
Even though we've got a lot of really good ones, we're always willing to try one more. And, local project, whatever. And Walker is going to take a good long look at Cyclades, but obviously we're pretty torn.
Yeah, it's not looking good.
That was Pledge of Indifference, our bi-weekly show about crowdfunding projects that happen to be available at the given moment. Now on to Bloat. Mark blathers on about things. A show where I basically get to ramble on about whatever. No matter what else happens, no matter what else I do in my life, and no matter what anyone says about me, whether it's Walker, all those mean people on the internet, other content creators that seem to just want to reach out and be cruel to me, I beat Returnal. Yeah, so in no small part thanks to a listener who gifted me a leftover graphics card, which was vastly superior that I've been running in my rig previously. Rig is what the cool people refer to their computers as. Now, granted, I have not paid for any of the components of my rig other than an SSD. This is what people know used to refer to a solid state drive. It's a drive that's like solid, and it's a state that's solid. Actually, I do know the difference between an SSD and a normal hard drive, but whatever. That's the only money I was able to put into my computer. The tower itself comes from Louis and all the components therein, and I bought a hard drive, and then a listener gave me a better video card. So that's where my computer comes from. Now, granted, I've got a tablet that I do all the recording on. I'm recording on it right now. But as I explained in the newsletter where I was going through my office setup, my computer itself, the one I do most of my work on now, is mostly from handing downs. But anyway, Returnal. I done beat it. And I have actually some reflections on Returnal as a game, and I think it has some illuminating, or at least revealing aspects for board game design. So going into the end of Returnal, and I enjoyed it a great deal, by the way. I highly recommend it if any of those elements, I've talked about it before, roguelike, bullet hell, third-person shooter-ish. It was very compelling, very challenging. There's some parts where it really kicked me upside the head, and then there were some parts that I found surprisingly easy. I had very good luck with the bosses. I don't know if anyone else has had this experience playing Returnal, but there were a couple bosses where I just, banged my head against a brick wall 2 or 3 times, and then all the other bosses, I killed them on the first try. Just breezed past them. I think part of it is because of my experience with bullet hell. Honestly, if insofar as I had any success with Returnal, it's because I have a couple of years of training in bullet hell shooters. And so if you see a wave of projectiles coming at you, sometimes just as a bullet hell player, I'd be like, okay, there's where I need to be. And then I'd remember, oh wait, I have an invincible dash. Okay. And then just things seem really easy at those points. Anyhow. Moving on to the actual board game stuff. I realized going into the ending of Returnal that I didn't really understand anything about the plot. There were some things I thought I knew, and there were a couple of events in the backstory, because a lot of it is about the backstory, about events that happened prior to the start of the game. That is, that they actually happened. Spoiler warning, there is the possible interpretation in Returnal, everyone's favorite one, of it was all a dream. It was all in the head of the protagonist. And, it's not ever really very satisfying. Hasn't been, I think, for 50 years. But anyway, moving on. There was one event that I thought I kind of understood. And past that, it was all a complete mystery. I had no clue what was happening and why. There are various levels of the narrative and various levels of the pre-narrative, and I didn't understand any of it. Except for one incident, I thought. Now, I still very much enjoyed the writing a lot of the time because it was definitely setting an atmosphere. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Returnal was that contra almost all media since the Avengers movies, the main character doesn't quip. She is a professional in a very, very difficult situation, and her nerves are fraying, and she doesn't quip. She doesn't taunt. She doesn't make witticisms. She's not trying to be in a Joss Whedon show, which is what pretty much every piece of media has been trying to be ever since the Avengers movies. Anyway, so we're heading in there, and there were a number of very, very memorable moments, even if I didn't understand the broader context. Sometimes you don't have to in order for things to be very moving. Little vignettes. There was one part in particular, which can't even be a spoiler because you won't even understand the context, where the main character is desperately trying to convince herself in a moment of self-deception as to how many flowers you need to make a bouquet. And it was very touching. I mean, in the abstract, it sounds stupid, right? It's like, what? The number of flowers? But it mattered. And it was very salient, and it was very touching, and it'll stay with me. So heading into the ending of Returnal, the ending was one of those cases where I was desperately holding on to what I thought I understood, and the ending clarified nothing, and in point of fact demonstrated to me that I did not understand the thing that I thought I understood. So I just had this drained look of dizzying incomprehension after watching the ending. And then you see the secret ending, which I've also seen. No matter what anyone else has said about me, I have beaten Returnal. And that didn't clarify much either. Anyway, then you go to the internet, and you try to read people's theories, but again, it's only at the level of theory. No one really knows, or at least if they think they know, they're kind of guessing. That's a whole thing. What this convinced me of was that I do not like emergent storytelling in video games. I want the narrative to be more direct. Now, emergent storytelling, it's not a dichotomy, right? You're going to have moments of emergent storytelling. And I keep the two best told video games that I can think of are probably Star Control 2, greatest game ever made, and Spec Ops The Line. And Spec Ops The Line is a tour de force of modern video game telling. And some of it is emergent, but a lot of it is pretty direct. Star Control 2, a lot of the storytelling is just through information dumps, frequently from a third party. It's like, oh, by the way, here's something that happened 2,000 years ago. It's just a quality of the writing and the world building that makes it work. There's no clever storytelling techniques at play, really, in Star Control 2. I mean, it was published in 1991, so we're willing to give it a little bit of slack. But emergent storytelling ain't my thing. As a way to deliver the plot, no thanks. For example, the other video game I've talked about recently, because the other one, the last one that I truly, truly enjoyed that came out that was new, was Elden Ring. Elden Ring, similarly, there's a story, things happen. Events transpire over the course of the game that are also inflected by events that transpired before the start of the game. And I don't really understand either of those things. The story that I would tell of Elden Ring is a character shows up and proceeds to systematically murder a whole bunch of things. That's the story of Elden Ring. See, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. But there's all this stuff about gods and pantheon and terrible things that happened and this, that, and the other. And some of the details kind of made sense to me, kind of, sort of, maybe, almost. But a lot of the storytelling in those games, and this is true also of the Dark Souls games from which the Elden Ring game was derived, is through, flavor text buried in a consumable item you might pick up. And then you're supposed to make connections through weird scattered references that people make elliptically, and then a kind of picture emerges. I don't get it. I played through a fair amount of the Dark Souls games, and I understood zero of it too. But there are people who care a great deal, and a large majority, I think, of people who put in as much time in those games collectively as I have seem to have a much better sense of what's going on. So in short, not only do I not like emergent storytelling, I don't think it's not a question of intelligence necessarily, because people have pointed out, look, Mark, if you're going to insist, as I do, and I mean this, that you don't want to talk about smart people and dumb people, then you shouldn't engage in self-deprecating humor either. If you say you're not smart enough for something, I'm not constituted properly. I don't have the right mindset or the right frame of reference to put together the stories of those From Software games. I just don't. Similarly, I'm not in a position to put together the story of something like Returnal. It just confuses me. Now, when it comes to movies and stuff like that, sometimes confusing stuff is great. It's exactly what I like. A fair amount of David Lynch stuff, not necessarily Twin Peaks, but Mulholland Drive I thought was great, and I loved going into what various things could have meant. Donnie Darko is one of my favorite movies, and there's nothing but trying to piece together various bits of nonsense in Donnie Darko. I don't know why I'm willing to forgive it in movies and not in video games. It is what it is. That's where it is. Possibly because I'm willing to engage in, a couple of hours of mysterious nonsense and what it means, as opposed to like 60 hours of video game where there's like bits of nonsense scattered throughout and I have to piece it together in some encyclopedic way. That's what wikis are for. I'll play the game, and if I care about the story enough, I'll try to find out answers on the internet, which is what I did with Returnal, and the answers I found about Returnal were big fat nothing. Okay, so let's bring it back to video games. I don't like the style of narrative that I would characterize as more direct in most board games. I want the storytelling in board games to be emergent. So compare, pretty much anything by Awakened Realms or by Fantasy Flight or, flavor text and the short story at the beginning and this, that, and the other. Take any of those and compare it to, say, a game of Meltwater, or a game of Innovation, or a game of Blue Moon, or a game of Tigers and Euphrates, whatever. I mean, the storytelling involved in those latter games, especially Meltwater, it's worth saying. Meltwater is some of the best emergent storytelling in board gaming ever. Not only is it a political satire and a political critique of a certain view of geopolitical armed conflict, but it also makes you feel, it evokes an emotion in you. It really sells the sentiment at the heart of the cruelty that it wishes to examine. Compare that to endless flavor text, right? Now, there's one exception, and that is most of the work of Nikki Valens, particularly Legacy of Dragonholt. To a certain extent, the storytelling in Splendid Vale. Splendid Vale has been a bit more of a slog. What I wanted Splendid Vale to be was a more robust and interesting combat system matched to some of the elements of Dragonholt's storytelling and quality writing. And instead, what I feel like I've got is a story that is told with perhaps the same technical accomplishment and skill as was told in Dragonholt, but of a different tone that I don't quite like as much, coupled with a combat encounter system that is very perfunctory and not very satisfying. Also very, very easy. So that's been the effort. But nonetheless, when it comes to storytelling, Nikki Valens is one of the best in terms of direct, overt storytelling in the world of board games, of hobby board games. And that's why I keep saying that they should really collaborate with David Thompson, because most of my best Nikki Valens experiences have been solo, or at least solo capable. Mansions of Madness 2nd, what they did with Mansions of Madness 2nd was really, really good. And really used the app to flex the storytelling muscle at the heart of what Kinesco wanted to do with Mansions of Madness. And Dragonholt remains the best choose-your-own-adventure style thing ever done in board gaming, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, most of the time, I don't want the explicit narrative in a board game. I want emergent narrative. I want emergent storytelling. I want the scattered bits of detail that inform you of a broader world. And the bits that get fleshed out of them in the middle are almost purely driven by your own actions. Because in context, going back to my rendition of the story of Elden Ring, character shows up and proceeds to systematically murder a great many things over the course of 100 hours. It was nonetheless compelling, even in a narrative level, because of the constant sense of discovery and the sense of agency that was at the core of all of it. I wouldn't want to watch a Let's Play. I don't generally watch people play video games, generally, unless it's fighting games to discover new techniques and things like that. But even if I were inclined to watch people play video games, having played Elden Ring, I definitely wouldn't be in a position to want to watch someone else play it again. I mean, I've seen this, unless they were going into some dungeon that I hadn't seen before, of which there were probably several. At any rate, I wanted Returnal to tell a more simple, straightforward story. And I want most board games to stop trying to tell me a story and give me the tools and the bones and the foundations to let the story emerge naturally. And it's a bit of a shame when you get something that's mechanically compelling, in the case of Returnal, failing to deliver that same narrative style that I would want. There are lots and lots of games, even abstracts or even close to abstracts, where I feel like a good story was told, but that was because of emergent storytelling. And that's something that the players can bring to the table. Some designs can facilitate it more or less than others, but there you have it. And no matter what else ever happens, I beat Returnal. Moving on, it's been a hot minute since I've talked about the American Supreme Court here on BLOAT, but let's return back to it. First off, in passing, I just want to note that I commented before that the standards that we have as a podcast and the standards that we adhere to here at So Very Wrong About Games seem to be much more stringent than those standards of many Supreme Court justices. And I say that with no joy or pleasure, right? Am I proud of the fact that we have high standards at SWAG? Yes. But I'm not happy with the fact that, 9 of the most powerful humans on Earth, which is what the Supreme Court justices are, seem to have varying levels of disdain for what I would call basic standards of even editorial rigor, and they're not even journalists or even trying to do anything remotely related to commentary. They're actually lawmakers. Much as they would dispute that characterization, of course, but we can speak as adults. They literally make law, so there you go. They're lawmakers. There's one exception, though. Thurgood Marshall. He was the first African-American justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. He was appointed in the 60s. His wife at the time, Cecilia Marshall, knew what she had to do. She knew she needed to be above reproach. She knew that her husband needed to be above reproach. She was keenly aware of the amount of attention that was being devoted to them. I commented before that, we're not eager to make friends amongst the game design community, and she went a step further. She felt, and she was very clear about this in a lot of her messages and correspondence. She had to freeze some existing friends out, she felt, in order to maintain the position. And this is her as the wife of a justice of the Supreme Court, right? Contrast that with some of the current spouses of the Supreme Court. But anyway, we don't think that as board game critics we have to go that far. But we're certainly not keen to make new social entanglements. We're not going to ice anybody out of the picture. Anyway, but moving on. So there's this notion in Supreme Court analysis and commentary called dicta, which is the plural of dictum. Latin just for stuff people said. And dicta is, as a category, is basically stuff that isn't law, stuff that isn't precedent, but maybe sometimes you can look at it for guidance, or maybe not. It's somewhat controversial. Generally speaking, the vibe that I get is if the dicta agrees with you, you can invoke it, but if the dicta doesn't agree with you, you dismiss it as irrelevant dicta. Anyway. And sometimes this is manifestly absurd. Like, for example, one bit of strange dicta that John Roberts invoked recently in Moore v. Harper was, well, Justice Blackmun's private notes seemed to indicate that this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, okay, fine. That's one thing. We don't tend to invoke private notes, especially when the judge was in a position to, write a ruling. But on top of that, the notes in question are quite at odds with the ruling he wrote, so why should we prefer his notes to the actual ruling that he wrote? Anyway, this is one of the reasons why proclamations from the bench can be somewhat complicated. It used to be, back in the day, before COVID, the way it used to work was people would read the decisions from the bench rather than just publish them. They still publish them online. But rather than just publish them, they would also read the ruling from the bench, but they wouldn't read the ruling. They wouldn't open it up and be like, okay, I'm going to read the ruling verbatim now from the bench. They would read a version of it, maybe sections, maybe edited, maybe just a different version. So there would be stuff that was in the red ruling that wasn't in the actual decision, and vice versa, obviously. Same thing with the dissents. And this could sometimes lead to very sincere difficulties. Say the law is ambiguous, say the decision is ambiguous. Well, can you then invoke what the person said from the bench if it wasn't included in the ruling? Well, maybe you can, maybe you can't, because that was only just one person talking about the ruling, when in theory the ruling was typically done by 5 or more justices. So things get complicated, so dicta is very controversial. The same is true, I would argue, in board games. The games that we've got, to a certain extent, the rule books are basically like the rulings. We've got this text, and when I've said this before, when it comes to board games and board game rules interpretation, I try to be a textualist, at least in the hopes that it's the most defensible and the most approachable and accessible for everybody involved, because everyone's got access to the rules, at least in theory. Maybe not always the same rules, different editions of different rules, but rather than relying on, some speculation that some person had on a message forum, or what someone thinks is more intuitively obvious, because let me tell you, get 3 gamers in a room together and you get 3 different versions of what's intuitively obvious. I once had a very heated argument with Louis that I'll never forget. We were playing Warhammer Underworld Shadespire. I thought he would love it. He hated the game almost exclusively because of the ability cleave. I tried to explain to him, look, in this game, I would show him the rulebook. Cleave means that a certain kind of defense roll doesn't work against that skill. He's like, no. Cleave means you hit multiple targets that you're standing next to. I'm like, yes, that's what it means in other games, but that's not what it means here. It's like, well, they clearly meant for that to work this way. Otherwise, they wouldn't have used the word cleave. I'm like, Louis, they meant for the ability to work the way it was described on the cards and in the rulebook. He's like, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's intuitively obvious. We went back and forth on this for quite some time. He was not pleased. I should have just given up. I should have just let him do the thing that he wanted to do. Whatever. Anyway, but setting all that aside. So I, try to defer to the text that's there. Now, obviously the text gets ambiguous all the time. And that's why I'm not a textualist in the case of law, right? In the case of law, I'm not a textualist because I think that you should be more sympathetic to things like context and policy. But then again, I'm not a constitutional supremacist anyway, so setting all that aside. Yes, I believe that Marbury versus Madison was wrongly decided. That is in point of fact what I'm saying. But setting all that aside. So where does this shake out? Well, for example, there's the great controversy in For Sale. I talk about this all the time. Whether you take half the bid rounded up or half the bid rounded down. There, at least, it's a case of conflicting texts. So you can just stipulate which edition you're playing, and the rulebook will be dispositive as to which way you want to play. Now, you don't have to do it that way. You can play For Sale however you want to. Just, stipulate how it's going to be, and that's how it's going to be. You obviously can't have player A working from one set of rules and player B from a different set of rules, since the player A gets to take back half their bid rounded down and player B gets to take back half their bid rounded up. That's obviously not workable. But you can stipulate, you can have different groups, even with the same edition of the game, the same physical components, playing with different rules, and that's fine, so long as it's clearly established. Then things get a little bit more complicated when we have a situation like in Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel is a Reiner Knizia design originally published by Hans im Glück. And first of all, it's a very good game. I highly recommend it. It's kind of an area majority game, but it's also kind of a deal-making game, and it's got a very interesting set of deal-making rules. When it was originally published, very soon, it was identified that there's a bit of a glaring problem with the rules as written. There are these things called action cards. If you are the one who is responsible for, quote-unquote, it's a little more complicated than that, but let's speak simply. I don't want to have to explain the entire rules of the game of the Tower of Babel to get this point across. If you finish off a wonder in the rules as published, you get a bonus card. The bonus cards suffer from two problems. First of all, they vary wildly in quality. Some of them are amazing, and some of them are not very good. That's bad enough. What makes it worse is that this action that is being incentivized by giving a bonus card is already something you want to do. It's an area majority game. It has area majority scoring in it. Everybody who plays area majority games, unless there's something really weird going on, knows that you want to go last. Going last is advantageous. You know exactly what needs to happen. You know what needs to be done. If you're going first, you're speculating as to what's going on. It's like, is 3 enough to get a good score here? I don't know. We'll see what other people do. So obviously you want to go last. If you're the one completing the wonder, if you're the one triggering the scoring, you're already in a position where you can control the lay of the board and get a significant advantage. You don't need another advantage on top of that, and you don't need the advantage to be massively swingy in terms of value. Well, word came down through the playground that the action cards were not designed by Reiner Knizia and were instead inserted by the publisher. And immediately a narrative emerged, and I will confess I was in that narrative 100%. That, this is another example of a publisher not understanding Reiner Knizia's genius. The great sacred Dr. Knizia can do no wrong, but Hans im Glück done messed it up. So don't play with the action cards. And I can tell you, having played a number of times with and a number of times without, Tower of Babel is better without the action cards. I still have it in my collection. I recommend it. If you have a chance to play Tower of Babel, play Tower of Babel. This simple, dare I say, simplistic narrative was complicated when it became clear that the developers and the publishers had not just inserted action cards, they'd also inserted a major rule into the game of Tower of Babel. That rule being, when you refuse somebody's offer, because remember I said there's a weird deal-making mechanism, the person whose offer you refuse gets 1 point per card you refused. So say someone says, I'm going to help you out with 2 pieces of stone and a piece of marble. And you say, no, go away, I don't need you. or I don't want you. You know, the same thing that my parents tell me. That person gets 3 points. It really makes the offer system very interesting in terms of the dynamics of the game. It also makes card flow very interesting. It's a very stellar part of the game. And Reiner Knizia had nothing to do with it. This was rumored a few years before the publication of Victory Point Games' quote-unquote follow-up to Tower of Babel called Planet Rush. Planet Rush was Reiner Knizia's sci-fi retheming of Tower of Babel with his original vision. It had 3 changes to the published Hans and Glück version, other than the theme. Number 1, no more these bonus cards. Great, fine. Number 2, this offer mechanism was excised. Number 3, scoring. The way it works in Tower of Babel is as you complete different wonders, the value of the wonders goes up. So the scoring gets higher and higher. The last wonder to be completed is worth more points than the first wonders. That was gone too. I've played Planet Rush. Well, more specifically, I've played Tower of Babel with Planet Rush rules, because you can do that. It is not nearly as good of a game as Tower of Babel is. I would venture to say, this is a bit of a weird comparison. It's been a while since I played with the action cards, but I dare say I would rather play Tower of Babel with those terrible action cards than I'd want to play Planet Rush. Because look, Reiner Knizia has designed some great games, but we all know that he's also designed some dull ones. Sometimes they've been mechanical and mathy in all the worst ways. Planet Rush, I think, is one of those games. You know, you hear about the offer mechanism is still unique, except as compared to Tower of Babel. And my general impression of Planet Rush is one of those games where it's like, oh, well, that sounds fascinating. That's a novel thing. Let's give it a shot. And then it's like, oh, shame it didn't pan out. Right? We've all had those experiences. And Tower of Babel, without that extra rule, is in there. So what does this have to do with dicta? Well, there's this huge mess, right? There's all this information flowing around about who came up with what, when, where, how, and why. And trying to trace back the true original design gets complicated. And this is one of the things, this is an important follow-on from one of the things I said in the show. I said I'm going to be trying to be more clear in my language from now on and not be sloppy and say I'm a fan of Reiner Knizia. I'm going to say I'm a fan of Reiner Knizia's games, or even just a subset of his games, because I don't like all of them. I haven't even played all of them. No human being can play all of them. Playing all of Reiner Knizia's games sounds like a more impossible proposition than finishing a game of campaign for North Africa. But I gotta say that this is an instance in which Hans im Glück got the short end of the stick. For years, amongst the Reiner Knizia fanboys, and yeah, we're an obnoxious lot, the story of Tower of Babel was that Reiner Knizia designed this great game and Hans im Glück almost ruined it. No! In point of fact, from my perspective, having now with a little bit of more information, we're now in a position that we can see that Reiner Knizia had a good idea and a bit of a mediocre game, and Hans im Glück made it shine. But in order to figure out who's responsible for what, you have to start tearing apart stuff for which we have no solid information. You have to start delving into the dicta, all this non-binding stuff. I heard that this developer introduced this rule, or this playtester suggested this thing. And we don't have good documentation for this. Even really well-done developers and designers' notes. First of all, we seldom get good designers' notes. Almost never in Eurogames, right? So we don't even have that. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a designer's diary, which serves mostly the same purpose. But do we get a developer diary? Almost never. Do we get playtester reports? Almost never. Do we get annotations in the rulebook saying what came from whom? No. It's all a black box. We've got a rulebook. We've got one or two, usually one or two, sometimes more names on the front of the cover. And that's that. And we don't know where all this stuff came from. And so naturally, this feeds into this sort of, cult of personality almost of the designer, which is a shame. I don't know if there's a solution to this. I don't know what's to be done. But it's unfortunate that we live in a situation where all this work, good or bad, is attributable to the designer. I mean, it would be just as bad if it was the opposite, right? What if Reiner Knizia had introduced the Tower of Babel the way I like it to be played, namely with progressive scoring and points for rejected offers but no action cards. Say he submitted that to Hans im Glück, and say Hans im Glück then published Planet Rush but with bonus action cards. In other words, the worst possible version of the game as far as I'm concerned. And we wouldn't know. Look, Reiner Knizia is a professional, right? He's not going to burn any bridges with publishers ever. He's not going to say... If you ask him, he'll probably tell you the truth, and indeed he did in some interviews. But this just makes me want to sit every designer down ever and say, all right, buddy, give me all the dicta. Tell me what they changed, how, and when. What's your director's cut of the game? Just between you, me, and the wall. And then tell everyone in the world. Not that I would do that, of course. Dicta complicates things in the realm of law. But dicta can give you an interesting perspective of the context of hobbyist board games. Because you can tweak a board game endlessly. I'm not inclined to do it my own damn self. I seldom have any intuitions about how to make a game better, specifically in terms of specific mechanisms or house rules. I'm very loath to introduce those things. But if we just had a bunch of dissents or a bunch of dicta appended to every rulebook, not even variants, but it's just sometimes we get this, right? This is what the designer wanted. This is what the developer wanted. The rules as published are A. We recommend starting with A. But if the designer had gotten their way, it would look like B. Give it a shot if you want. Sometimes this happens, but far too rarely. And so as a result, we have to start paging through interviews and speculating. It's not a factually accurate representation of how the board game industry works, and I think it leaves us in a somewhat impoverished position in terms of options about how to play games. Because you don't even have to necessarily have a solid intuition about how to improve games, but after playing a game, you might think, A and B are promising, but I have some doubts. Just hearing about how different variants work, experienced gamers usually might have an intuition about which ones they'd like to try and which ones they don't think are as promising. And I suspect they'd have a high degree of success. I want there to be more dicta in board gaming and less dicta in law. That's my position. That was BLOAT, Mark Blathers On About Things. Before we continue, we've got to pay some bills. Imagine a world where you can play games and get caffeinated without getting the shakes and bathroom urgency associated with energy drinks and coffee. Imagine grokking that rules explanation, never holding up the game, and personifying game flow itself with focus and control that comes on in minutes and lasts for hours with zero crashing. What if the solution came in 50-plus flavors and 5 strengths? Dr. Steve's Caffeine Melts bring +2 hand size, income, and defense rolls to the real world, no longer requiring going up silly tracks or expensive upgrades. Absorbed under the tongue, Caffeine Melts bring a sublingual experience that features clean focus minus the bad side effects. With the code SOWRONGGAMES25, you can get 25% off and experience caffeine reimagined by placing a purchase on caffeinemelts.com. Focus and be awesome with Dr. Steve's Caffeine Melts, the only sublingual caffeine that comes in 50-plus flavors. Speaking personally, I hate coffee, but like feeling good, so I've been absolutely loving Dr. Steve's Caffeine Melts. That's caffeinemelts.com, promo code SOWRONGGAMES25. And we're back to the show. To close out this sampler of Patreon-exclusive content, here is a segment of SIZZLER, Spirit Island zealously zapping legions of European rapscallions. You know, I'm beginning to suspect I may have an acronym problem. I don't know if there's any official form of treatment. Anyway, this is the beginning of the very first SIZZLER. There have been 5 published so far, and more to come.
And here we see the gnawing root biter, enjoying its meal of animated rackroot. It lives in uncomfortable symbiosis with the tormenting rotflies, whose preferred diet is the flesh of damn fool colonizers who don't come correct. And now, for a rare glimpse of the stately sea monsters, whose ponderous lurchings in our direction mean it is time to pray for a quick death.
Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural episode of Spirit Island, zealously zapping legions of European rapscallions. SIZZLER, devoted to our recounting of games of Spirit Island. With me, and this is a great pleasure, first time on the podcast, is my great friends Jimbo.
Hello.
And Megan.
Hello.
You might have seen them before on streaming. They are marvelous human individuals whose voices I felt needed to be heard broader on the interwebs. And just some of our general background about the game, I've been, as I've said before a number of times on the podcast, I've been playing Spirit Island for years before it was published. But actually, I think my first intuition that something was going to come of it was when I played it with you, Jimbo. And this was years and years ago, right after Kickstarter had fulfilled.
Yep.
And you were completely blown away.
Absolutely. I think Spirit Island is, if not my number one game of all time, easily in my top 5, probably my top 3. I'm a huge co-op fan. I love that sort of area denial, kind of the team play, just everything about Spirit Island. And the theme, everything about the theme just constantly blows me away, from the cool name of Spirits and Powers. I love Spirit Island. Everything about it, I'm very enthusiastic. We'll always take a chance to play.
And Megan, what's your history with the game?
I mean, I think I got to it a little bit later than everyone else here, but I also really love it. I also love co-ops. I find a lot of the complaints about co-ops are like, quarterbacking and things like that. And it's so hard to quarterback it.
Borderline impossible, yeah.
So I love the complexity and the crunchiness of it. And the Fun Spirit names are great.
Yeah, I think that echoes a lot of what I've been hearing, because in terms of slightly crunchier Euro-style co-ops, there's not a whole lot there. I mean, there's Mage Knight, and that's about it.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, yeah, crunchy European-style co-ops are thin on the ground, for sure.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. So, we just finished a 3-player game of Spirit Island, as you might imagine. And, Megan, why don't you tell us about the setup that we had?
We were dealing with the invasion of Sweden.
Invasion's a good word for it.
And what does Sweden do again? I was not looking at the invader
Sweden's
deck.
big on heavy mining, so if they do
they
6 or more
they do
damage,
extra blight. Yeah, we never let them do extra blight, so we didn't actually encounter it much.
Yeah, we did Sweden level 2, which gives them an extra fear card, an extra setup condition, the escalation condition, of course, and that aforementioned 6 damage, which never became an issue.
Yeah, the starting with an extra city was pretty intimidating off the go, and there were definitely some points where at least I looked at my board and thought, uh-oh, I have already let things get out of control.
So this was difficulty level 3, which in hindsight I think is probably a little bit lower than that is probably our normal comfort level.
I would suspect so. We're at the point now where we're going through the adversaries each at difficulty level 4. I suspect we could probably go up to difficulty 6, and that would be where we begin to probably really struggle. I have fond memories of playing it with Trevor and Walker, where we tried France at difficulty 6 on the thematic board and got just ruined. Like 3 or 4 turns, they completely just wiped us out. It was pretty shocking.
France is hard if you can't deal with them right off the bat.
Yeah, and it did not help that on the cinematic side of the board, or the thematic. I can never remember which it's actually
thematic,
called.
I think.
One of the lands starts with 4 explorers, so they explored into it and then immediately turned it into like 4 or 5 towns, and it was all downhill for France from there.
Wow, I've never played the so-called thematic board. Wow,
it's a ride, and it's beautiful. The thematic board is beautiful, and I feel bad that I don't play on it, but I just love how clear everything is spelled out on the main board. Like,
right.
There's no argument about what's what. There's no concern about anything like that. Maybe I should probably get to trying the thematic board at some point, but it's just sort of on the list of I'd like to, but I'm not. It's like the scenarios, right?
Yeah.
We probably should play the scenarios at some point, but I'm not exactly fussed about it.
And you were commenting, Megan, that your difficulty level seems to be roughly the same.
Yeah,
preferred level, that is.
Again, I could probably tend to play a little bit higher than what we played today, but not much.
Yeah, it's weird, and I'll just repeat something I've said a bunch of times before. There are 2 factors that lead me to gravitate towards difficulty level 3 and under. Number 1, Spirit Island is good even when you're engaged in a raffle stomp. Even when it's trivial, you still get to pull fun levers and see fun things happen.
Absolutely.
And even at higher difficulty levels, Spirit Island is often a power fantasy. So, low difficulty levels often help with that. And number 2, I wish there were really high difficulty levels that didn't have like 6 different lines of added rules to process every time the invaders did anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I suspect that if we do get up to the higher difficulty levels, the first one will probably be Brandenburg, Prussia, just because a lot of it's just front-loaded setup stuff. Mm-hmm. They rarely do. But some of them, the angry betentacled clauses and subclauses become a real bear to deal with.
Yeah, it can be hard to remember, like, oh, right, the invaders were supposed to do this when this other thing happened, and it can be a little tedious to deal with some of them. But
Yeah.
if it's set up, like, well, this is hard, but...
Part of me wonders if there's a way to make really, really good player aids to parcel out the invader responsibilities so that everyone is responsible for just one or two items. But anyway, that is a challenge for a future day. As I say, we were doing level 2, difficulty level 3 Sweden, which is actually my one complaint about the way expansions have been rolling out, because there's no difficulty level keying on the original adversaries' tracks, but whatever.
Yeah, I'd love to see the originals reprinted with the same difficulty level printing as the jagged Earth ones.
Yeah, to not have to refer to the rulebook would be very, very helpful. So why don't we talk about the spirits we chose and our general experiences with them. Jimbo, why don't you take us away?
So I decided to play Starlight Seeks Its Form this time. I generally like, when we're playing with adversaries, I like to take a look at who's extra difficult to play against them and who makes them somewhat easier. For Sweden, it's spirits that can prevent ravages. So I was looking at, taking a strong look at Vital Strength of the Earth and Jagged Stone's Unyielding Defiance.
Yeah, you love both of those. You played both of those spirits a number of times.
Yeah, but I've played, I'm not wild about Vital Strength of the Earth, and I play the Stone Spirit quite a lot. So I decided instead to try Starlight Seeks Its Form with more of a defensive bent.
Right. And Starlight Seeks Its Form is the create a spirit.
Yeah, that's the craft a spirit, where you start with several much smaller tracks, and as you put presence onto the board, you unlock new growth powers. You get to choose 3 growth options in a turn, which gives it, I think, almost unparalleled flexibility once it gets going. As well, every time you reveal an element, you get to choose what element that it permanently is. So I'd originally started with quite a lot of earth with the intent of being defensive, and then drew a major power relatively early on that shifted my focus slightly more towards fire and water.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that one?
So I definitely found that although I was defending quite well, my board was getting out of control. There were a lot of cities, towns were building up, explorers were getting to be a problem as well. So I went for a major power. And my options were 1 power that didn't really work, 2 powers that were interesting, and Flame and Flood, which allows you to target 2 separate lands and do 4 damage to each. If you have 3 fire, you can do 4 damage to one of those lands. If you have 3 water, you can do an additional 4 damage to either land or the same. And that allowed me to combo with Starlight Seeks Its Form's custom power that gives it an extra card play and the ability to choose one of its cards to play during the fast phase. So normally Flame and Flood is slow. This allowed me to Scourge the land with Fire and Flood during the fast phase for 4 and 8 or 8 and 8 damage, depending on how I got my elements going.
Yeah, and you did that 2 or 3 times, and that, I think that was definitely what pushed us over. I think that was the sign that we moved from the mid-game into the end-game when you were pulling that crap in the middle of the fast phase, while, I should stress, still doing other things, like supporting the rest of us.
It's definitely not a good thing for the invaders when major powers start hitting the board in the fast phase. That's
the thing. I remember counseling, or at least partially recommending Power Storm as an option, because Power Storm is such a great support ability. Mm-hmm. But I completely forgot, and it's a good thing you didn't, that Starlight Seeks Its Form can basically pick its own elements. And so you were in a position to just craft yourself to get in there, and it just completely destroyed everything.
I did, on a previous game, probably several years ago now, a friend of mine played Starlight Seeks Its Form for his first time. And he took Power Storm, and he had gone the Sun route, and the amount of fear he was generating every turn. Starlight Seeks Its Form's Sun aspect gives it free energy and fear generation.
Right.
And then Power Storm lets you repeat stuff. So the amount of fear flying around the board was just absurd. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah. The Siren Call of damage during the growth phase is so appealing, but I think it might be a bit of a dead ender. When compared to some of the other things that you can do if you get a good power, good major power to work with.
Yeah, I think if you can get that 0 cost, range 0, 2 damage during the growth phase early, like really early.
Yeah.
It really does let you preempt some of the faster growing adversaries.
Yeah.
But if you're already several turns in, I don't think you can argue with an extra card play and one of your slow powers is fast.
Yeah. And your characterization of your board, I think, is accurate. I disagree that it went out of control, but very quickly it went from a smattering of cities and a lot of towns everywhere to at the end of the game where we won by a fear victory. Your board was, there were a couple of explorers kicking around, if that?
I think I still had a town.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think your board was definitely the clearest of them.
It let me hold off long enough while you and Megan generated the boatloads of fear that we needed to push it to the victory.
On that topic, Megan, why don't you talk about your spirit?
I played Spread of Rampant Green, which is a great spirit for flexibility also, I find.
How so?
Just because you can always remove your elements, your presence to stop something from happening. So you don't need to rely on, I need to get this element threshold to defend or to move them out of here to stop the bill. Like, well, I'm great at getting presence out. I will just keep getting presence out, and if some of it goes away, that's fine. I can put it back out again.
Yeah, exactly. Flood the board with presence and use it as necessary.
It was wild. I'd forgotten. It's been a while since I played a lot of Spread of Rampant Green shortly after release, and I haven't played for a while. I'd forgotten that it's an odd combination of damage and support, which is a strange mix. You did both very well, I thought.
It is interesting like that, because the main thing, the thing is best at dealing with is houses, towns, yes. Lets you move towns, 2 damage is a pretty reasonable thing. It wasn't until sort of late game when I was able to really start kicking cities. But it wasn't like, even the explorers weren't too much of a worry. Like, you go ahead, build a town, I will deal with you later.
Yeah, exactly.
Please build the town. I could use that too, Fear.
Yeah. I remember offering you push abilities at several instances, and you were just always so indifferent. Like, it's like, yeah, I mean, look, if they build a town, what do I care? And what was you were generating like 6 to 8 fear during some of those rounds. What was doing that?
That was I wasn't generating a lot of fear in the early game. That was mostly you. But once I got going, I had the card that lets me either put presence out or generate fear if I have presence and invaders in a spot, and that does 3 fear on its own. And then I forget the name of it because it was one of those long name cards, but the
long name cards are the best, Megan.
Yeah, I know I haven't memorized it, but it was Plants Ride in the Wind or something like that. Breeze was in
Angry Pollen? You played Angry Pollen?
But it did a lot of damage triggering on green tags, which I had a lot of.
Yes.
And dumped out Wilderness as well, so they couldn't get back into the spot.
Yeah, it was a 3-cost major power that triggered off of... It's not Earth. What's the name of the green element?
Plant. We always call it plant.
Yeah,
nature.
Plant. That triggers off of plant, and you were like, okay. I remember when you pulled it, it was like, sure.
Yeah, this is looking. Yeah, and the triple overgrowth tokens. Like, no, you're never exploring that in this place. That's not.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, by the time the thing is, it's a 3-cost major power, so you could theoretically be playing it in the early game. But I don't. You know, at that point, honestly, by the time you were dropping overgrowth, at that point it was academic.
Yeah. Also, the other thing I didn't do fear early game. I didn't get power cards early game. I was really just playing my starting power cards and just pushing, getting presence out.
Well, you gave me an early presence that was crucial, and you gave Jimbo what, 2 or 3?
Oh yeah, and as Starlight seeks its form, getting that extra presence out for new power customization and new symbols, and it definitely paved the path for flaming and flooding.
Yeah. And on top of that, your general indifference to losing presence helped out with one event in particular where everyone got to pick. I mean, the events overall were not kind to us, I don't think. Early on, we got a very, very favorable event, but then we got one that doubled the explorers for that round in conjunction with Sweden's escalation, and that was nightmarish. We lost a whole bunch of Dahan out of that.
Yeah, it was rough.
Yeah, because the escalation power, for listeners that don't have it ready to mind, is Sweden, after they explore, and keep in mind at this point they've just added 2 new explorers, if the number of invaders equal the number of Dahan, they will convert a Dahan into a town. That was terrible. By the end of the game, we had hardly any Dahan left on the board, and we just lost a whole bunch at a wash, that one.
Yeah, I'm really glad that I didn't play Thunderspeaker. I had originally thought,
yes,
maybe if I can keep the Dahan in big groups
bulk,
to avoid it.
Yep.
But I'm not sure I would have been able to group them up fast enough to avoid that.
In hindsight, it would have been really, really rough. In hindsight, though, by the same token, maybe I should have played Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves, because we were drowning in beasts at various points, both by virtue of events and because what Jimbo's leaving out is that in addition to loving the fire and loving the flood, he also liked insects, strangely. It was a tripartite fixation.
I loved the ants, the all-consuming ants, and I picked up a card, Hazard Spread Across the Island, which allows you to duplicate an adjacent Badlands, Overgrowth,
right,
disease, strife, or beasts. You have to pay energy if you duplicate a disease, but so I was just duplicating beasts all over the place to allow me to target Carapace land more easily, which in turn the events were like, you like beasts? Great! Here's a whole lot of things that beasts do.
Yeah, the beasts turned out definitely for a fight. So my spirit was hashtag best spirit, shadows flicker like flame. The 2 spirits that we personify the most, I think, are Spread of Rampant Green and Shadows Flicker Like Flame. Spread of Rampant Green, just because we love that line in the background about how Spread of Rampant Green thinks it's being helpful even when it's not. And so we've kind of imagined Spread of Rampant Green as kind of a coked out, over-enthusiastic horticulturalist. It's like, hey guys, I saw you were planting plants. Here, cucumbers everywhere, bye!
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, great.
That's wonderful.
We were actually hoping to plant, but I guess
I didn't want a foundation, yeah. And Shadows Flicker Like Flame, honestly, one of the reasons why I love it so much is because of Favors Called Due, which I used with Reckless Abandon. I moved them to Han all over the place. I fed them to Jimbo for a while, but then I took them back. And because if every time you move them, if Dahan outnumber the invaders, you generate 3 fear. I generated like probably a fear card a fear card or two by that alone.
At least the first 4 or 5 fear cards were all you and Megan. Like I may have chipped in 1 or 2, but up to the first, like, you know, I would say solidly halfway through the deck, it was all you two with a lot of fear from yours.
By that point, but the thing is, though, after that tipping point, you were generating as much fear as we were through sheer damage. So when you wipe out 3 towns during the fast phase,
it's hard to say
3 cities.
It's hard to say no to Flame and Flood when you can guarantee you're going to be able to hit for 8 and 4.
Well, one of my consistent problems, being the conservative gamer that I am, is that I tend never to go for the major powers soon enough, and especially Shadows Flicker traditionally has energy problems, but there were 2 things keeping that in check. Number 1 was the occasional support bennies, either from Megan or from Jimbo, and number 2, the fact that I was playing with the Madness aspect, which doesn't cost any power. Madness is every time you add a presence through growth, you get to add Strife. Strife is probably one of my favorite tokens.
Same. I love Strife.
It's not very good. It's not as good as defense, but it's just so casual. It's like, just drop it there. Maybe you'll use it next round. Maybe you'll use it 10 rounds from now. Who cares? It'll wait. And the major I picked up was Twisted Flowers, Murmur, Ultimatums. I had just been telling Megan that my 2 favorite card names were Twisted Flowers, Murmur, Ultimatums, and Death Falls Gently from Open Blossoms. And I got to play Twisted Flowers boosted twice. I didn't think I was going to get the elements out. But then Jimbo, lovely Jimbo, was like, could anyone use a couple elements? Like, I would love a couple plant. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you were quite that polite about it.
there may have been several, it's mine, you can't have it, it's mine. That might have happened.
Look. I wanted to make sure that people understood the ferocity with which I desired it, and how disappointed I would be if somebody else took it from me. No, look, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, you never had any element concerns.
Oh, I was mostly fine.
Yeah, I mean...
But by the time elements were offered, I was fine.
Yeah, exactly. And by the time elements were offered, I had given up on the prospect of Twisted Flowers being used in the boosted way, because it needed Moon, no problem, I was drowning in Moon. Wind, which I could do if I could work on it. And Plant. I had 1 card that generated Plant, Twisted Flowers. So Jimbo was the one that was able to do it. I had more Animal than I had Moon. I was able to boost a couple of Animal cards and inflame the fires of life. But anyway, and boosted Twisted Flowers is great. It's a shame I wasn't able to do it more. It was 3 damage, remove 3 invaders, and 7 fear, and a Strife.
Yeah, I love Twisted Flowers, Murmur Ultimatums. It's much just like Death Falls Gently from Open Blossoms is one of my favorite names for a card, and it's so potent. Once it starts rolling and the invaders are just drowning in fear and losing some of their support guys, it's fabulous.
And so I think it's hardly a surprise then that we won so handily. We weren't really in any danger, I don't think, at any time. 1 Blight was ever added?
Yeah,
which we then removed?
1 Blight was added, which was then removed. I, at one point, felt in danger early on, but looking back, I realized I wasn't actually in danger. I just felt I was. So.
Well, that's the genius of Spirit Island. It makes you feel like you're in trouble even when you're not.
Agreed.
And we all, I think the key is, a good way to summarize it is, we all had major powers that we were playing boosted, right? It is hard not to win when everyone at the table is able to do that. Like, things have to go seriously wrong for that to be overcome in any way. And our minor power game wasn't weak either.
No, definitely not. Some of our minor powers were real workhorses.
And that was SIZZLER, Spirit Island zealously zapping legions of European rapscallions. Hope you enjoyed this peek into exclusive content if you haven't heard it already. And if you want to support us, that's great. And if not, that's fine too. We hope you enjoyed it regardless. Thanks very, very much for spending time with us. You're going to hear us back again on Tuesday morning for a regular show of So Very Wrong About Games. Thanks again for deciding to spend some time with us. We hope to see you again soon. And as ever, if you want to reach out and let us know that you want something covered or you have any questions about anything that we do on the show or feedback, you can find all our contact information at sowronggames.com/contact, and we read everything that you send to us. Thanks again, take care, and see you soon.
You've been listening to So Very Wrong About Games, produced by Michael Walker and edited by Mark Bigney. Special thanks goes to What Does It Eat for generously allowing us to use their most excellent song, FOS, as our theme. You can find them at whatdoesiteat.com. You can reach us by email at soverywrongaboutgames@gmail.com or on Twitter at SoWrongGames. Thanks very much, see you next time, and always, try to be right, but remember you are so very wrong.